Our framers knew nothing but 700 years of kingdoms. I don't know if you remember, but in our history we are taught that shortly after our revolution there were people begging George Washington to be king. We could have very well been a kingdom. But we had enough people who realized that the kingdom thing doesn't work out so well. And that kings only keep their promises as long as you hold a sword at their throat. The minute you drop the sword, they go back to being kings, and people go back to being subjects. So it's about time we stop allowing the federal government to drive around in our car. We stop focusing on federal government as our solution because they're not going to fix themselves. And we have no power to fix them. We need to find the real solutions. Let us remember, Samuel Adams said, if we tamely suffer a lawless attack upon our liberty, we encourage it and involve others in our doom. It's a very serious consideration which should deeply impress our minds that millions yet unborn may be the miserable sharers of our experience. You and I have done nothing to secure the liberty to sit in this tent today, to speak freely about government, to freely associate. I have books, freedom of press. I don't know if you started this off with a prayer, but we could have very well started it off with a prayer. We did nothing to secure those rights. Those were done by those who came before us. But we have an obligation to pay that liberty forward. And we're doing a miserable job of it. We are failing. We have become pacified in prosperity, we've become lazy in luxury, and we've become complacent and compliant within our comfort. Jefferson said, it's a matter of human nature that people will suffer evil as long as it's sufferable. We have to recognize that we are on a train of abuses and figure out how to pull the brakes. And this is what we're going to do. We need to keep the proper perspective of the government. A government of the people, by the people, for the people. That's exactly what Jefferson said. A government instituted among men, deriving its just powers from the consent of the governed. Now, I'm no fan of Lincoln myself, but 100 monkeys with 100 typewriters in 100 days might get something right too every now and again. So, government is receiving its just powers from the consent of the governed. That government is limited and defined by the Constitution. How do we understand this proper perspective? Well, what we need to understand first is that the Constitution is a contract. It is a legally binding contract. It's even written in contractual form. It looks just like a contract. The interesting thing is that our framers call it a contract. Well, not exactly. They call it something better. They call it a compact. A contract is a legally binding agreement between people. A compact is a legally binding agreement between sovereign governments. Anybody got an idea of who the sovereign governments are that made that agreement?
The states.
Right. So we have a legally binding contract where the states are the parties to the Constitution of contract and the federal government is the product. We're going to hear from James Madison. This is Federalist Papers 45. He says the powers delegated by the proposed Constitution are few and defined. Those which are to remain in the state governments are numerous and indefinite. See, we made a few and defined box for the federal government. And then we said the powers that are in the states are numerous and indefinite. Now, Madison doesn't wait around for the Supreme Court to pool their ignorance and decide what the powers are. He says the powers of the federal government will be exercised principally on external objects. That's founders speak for foreign affairs. What are those foreign affairs? Madison tells us again. War, peace, negotiation, and foreign commerce. That is the limited defined box that we put the federal government in. Your only power is foreign affairs. And Madison continues and says, the powers reserved to the several states will extend to all the objects which in the ordinary course of affairs concern the lives, liberties, and properties of the people, the internal order, improvement, and prosperity of the states. If it's not war, peace, negotiation, foreign commerce, if it's not related to a foreign affair, it is a power reserved to the states. We simply said we are creating a central government whose only job is to be an ambassador on behalf of the states in foreign affairs, and the other condition is that the federal government will leave the states alone to govern themselves. This is not something that we made up. This is a reflection of British history, an agreement from 1014 called the Ethelred Agreement, in which the Anglo-Saxon began their kingdom with that same agreement. Your only job, king, is foreign affairs. You will leave us alone to govern ourselves in our small Anglo-Saxon communities.